The vintage speaker market has one rule: the older the name, the higher the price. And nobody questions it. Pairs that sold for $200 in 1974 are listed on eBay today for $1,500. Stay until speaker 3. That one will genuinely surprise you. Today the list goes public. JBL L100 Century. Walk into any vintage audio store and you will find them. The iconic orange foam grille, the punchy sound, the price tag that has doubled in 5 years. The JBL L100 Century is the best-selling speaker in JBL's history and one of the most culturally significant audio objects ever produced. Released in 1970 as a home version of JBL's professional studio monitors, it became the definitive rock speaker of the 1970s, present in dens and living rooms across America, blaring Led Zeppelin and Fleetwood Mac at volumes that neighbors could appreciate whether they wanted to or not. Vintage L100 pairs in good condition now sell for $1,500 to $2,500 on eBay. Here is what that money is actually buying. The L100's frequency response is what engineers call a smiley face EQ. Boosted bass, boosted highs, and weak mid-range. That was a deliberate design choice for the era. It makes rock music sound exciting. It does not make recording sound accurate. The drivers can sound disconnected. Imaging is vague. The simple crossover design that seemed adequate in 1970 is elementary by modern standards. JBL themselves released the L100 Classic in 2018 at $4,000 a pair, acknowledging that the original design needed significant engineering work to perform at a modern standard. The vintage originals you are paying $2,000 for on eBay are the version that JBL's own engineers decided needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. Verdict, an iconic design built for excitement rather than accuracy, priced by nostalgia rather than performance. Bose 901. The Bose 901 was released in 1968 and represented a genuinely original idea. Amar Bose designed a speaker that fired 8 of its 9 drivers backward into the wall, bouncing the majority of the sound around the room before it reached your ears. The concept was called direct reflecting. The idea was to replicate the experience of a live concert where sound arrives from multiple directions simultaneously. It was a provocative idea, and it made Bose enormously successful. For a period in the 1970s and 1980s, the 901 was the aspirational speaker of the American middle class. Musicians endorsed it. It became a cultural object. Here is what the mythology omits. The 901 requires a dedicated equalizer. Without it, the frequency response is so far from flat as to be unusable. That equalizer must be found and purchased separately for vintage pairs, and working original units are increasingly scarce. Beyond the equalizer dependency, Series 3 and later used foam surrounds. 18 drivers per pair are all subject to foam rot. Restoration of a fully rotted pair requires refoaming 18 individual drivers, a job that costs hundreds of dollars before you have even addressed the crossover components. Vintage 901 pairs in good condition with a working equalizer sell for $800 to $1,500. At that price, modern speakers from ELAC, KEF, or Klipsch will outperform them on every objective measure. You are paying for one of the most effective marketing operations in audio history. Bose built a brand that made consumers feel that disagreeing with the 901 meant they did not understand music. That is not audio engineering, that is psychology. Verdict, the most successfully marketed speaker in history. Not the best, the most marketed. Pioneer HPM 100. The Pioneer HPM 100 was Pioneer's flagship monitor series speaker, released in 1976. It had 4 drivers, a distinctive grille, and the HPM name implied professional studio credentials. Pioneer sold the story of studio accuracy to the consumer market, and the HPM 100 was the centerpiece of that campaign. The HPM 100 was never a studio monitor. Its crossover design introduced phase issues between drivers, problems engineers documented at the time, and modern measurement tools make plainly visible. The high-frequency response is uneven. The multiple drivers produce a sound experienced listeners consistently describe as congested in the mid-range. Used pairs now sell for $800 to $1,200 on eBay. At that price, you are buying a visual icon, not a precision instrument. The look of a studio monitor, the sound of a consumer speaker from 1976, at the price of something it was never meant to be. But here is what nobody mentions about the vintage premium you are paying. Inside those beautiful wood cabinets, the foam surrounds are deteriorating. The crossover components have drifted from their original values over 50 years. The sound you are paying $1,200 for has not existed since 1979. A full restoration, new surrounds, crossover recap, cabinet refresh costs $400 to $600 from a competent technician. Add that to the purchase price, and you have spent between $1,200 and $1,800 on a speaker that a $350 ELAC will outperform in a blind test. Verdict: a visual icon that requires significant investment to perform as it once did and still loses to modern engineering at the same price. Before speakers 4 and 5, if this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe now. No sponsored gear, no manufacturer relationships, just what the technicians know. Speaker 4 is the one that carries a name every serious audiophile in this room treats as the ultimate reference. Here is why the technicians disagree. Rogers LS35A. The Rogers LS35A is the most romantically described speaker in hi-fi history. Developed by the BBC for use in outside broadcast vans in the 1970s, it became the reference small monitor for professional broadcasting and acquired a reputation in the audiophile community that has made original pairs command prices above $3,000 today. Here is what the romance leaves out. The LS35A was designed to operate in a mobile broadcast van where engineers sitting a few feet in front of it needed to make quick mixing decisions. It was not designed for home listening. It was not designed for full-range reproduction. The bass response cuts off at around 70 Hertz. In a room with any acoustic challenges, and most listening rooms have acoustic challenges, the LS35A's famously jewel-like mid-range becomes an exercise in filling in what is missing. Modern small monitors from Harbath, who make current designs derived from the LS35A, cost significantly less than vintage originals and outperform them in every measurable dimension. The vintage premium you are paying is entirely for the BBC provenance and the audiophile mythology around it. Verdict: a broadcast tool from a mobile van, priced like a luxury object because of who originally commissioned it. The most overpriced vintage speaker in the market right now: Sansui SP and Kabuki series. Sansui dominated the receiver and amplifier market in the 1970s. Their amplifier engineering was exceptional. Sansui receivers from the 1970s are genuinely worth hunting for. But their speaker lineup has been swept up in the nostalgia for the brand, and that nostalgia has nothing to do with how the speakers actually perform. The SPX series and Kabuki branded speakers now command $500 to $1,500 on the used market, driven almost entirely by the Sansui name rather than the speakers themselves. Sansui speakers were always the weakest part of their lineup. They were designed to be bundled with those receivers at a competitive price point. The drivers used Japanese OEM components that were respectable for the era, but have not aged as gracefully as the brand name. Crossover components have drifted significantly from their original values over 50 years. What you are buying is the logo, not the performance. The halo of a great brand applied to the weakest part of that brand's lineup. Prices mentioned are US-based estimates. Check your local market. So, what should you actually buy from the vintage market? The technicians have already answered this question. Their listening rooms tell you everything. If you want vintage, buy the large Advent. Designed by Henry Claus and released in 1969, used pairs sell for $300 to $500, a fraction of what comparable era Bose and JBL speakers command. Because the large Advent never had the marketing machine behind it. What it has is engineering. Properly restored at around $400, it competes with modern bookshelf speakers at double the price in a way that most vintage speakers simply do not. If you want modern engineering at an honest price, the ELAC Debut 2.0 B6.2 at $350 a pair does everything the vintage market promises and cannot deliver. It was designed by Andrew Jones, measured, serviceable, no foam to rot, no crossovers to drift, no mythology to pay for. The vintage market runs on nostalgia and the assumption that old means good. What you are buying in most cases is a story about an era that felt more exciting than the present. It is priced by collectors competing for that story rather than the sound. Honest engineering does not expire. Honest pricing does not require mythology. Here is the principle. I want you to take away from this video one question. Are you paying for the sound or for the story? Every speaker on this list charges premium prices for a story. The foam is rotting. The crossovers have drifted. The sound you are paying $1,500 for has not existed since 1979. The technicians already know this. Now you do too. If this saved you from an expensive mistake, subscribe. What is the most you ever paid for a vintage speaker, and would you make the same decision today? Drop it in the comments. See you next time.